It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted from a kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. We are back at the bench this week for the show. Down to the wire as per last week. I'm hoping it's the time of the year because it's going to be quite an emotional roller coaster if I'm getting these episodes out. Recorded and out pretty much on the same day each week when I'm back to work. But as I say, I do think it's the time of the year. A lot of my penciled yeses are penciled yeses once the year resumes proper, which is normally in about the next 2 weeks, isn't it? So many thanks to this week's guest, Mr. Russell Brown, for coming in today and recording with me. He is probably, in the scheme of things, the guest thus far that I've had the least personally to do with, kind of acquainted through good old social media, though I've known who he is for years through, firstly, his BFM feature Hard News, which went for many years on Mikey's Breakfast Show, actually in various other iterations of B's Breakfast Show. So I think even as a non-Auckland resident at the time, I must have been at least aware as a guest up here that he did that feature. So we chat a little about that. Actually, this week's podcast made me wonder as I listened back to some of it where I'm actually going. As I think the first bulk were very much mainly concentrated on said guest's career as a backbone running throughout to sort of bounce into other issues. Last week with Dave, we focused for an extended length of time on politics, which was fantastic. Dave's someone I'd like to have on as a semi-regular guest, actually, to discuss world affairs and mechanics in far more detail than I know. But related to the podcast itself on a week-by-week basis, and where we went this week or where I went this week with Russell, is I think the first part, we definitely were going to go down the road of sort of talking about his career up till now, but we kind of did that at the beginning, then ended up back at world politics again with another commentator I'm very much keen to hear his opinion on, and then spoke at length for the end of the podcast about drugs and drug policy and recovery and addiction, all topics that came up as a part of Russell's recent podcast series on Radio New Zealand, and also his ongoing work as a journalist for the New Zealand Drug Foundation's magazine. So all really interesting stuff, I'd like to think, but maybe a change in focus, or as I say, I use the term backbone for how the podcast is structured. I'm not sure. Keen to hear your thoughts and feedback. Do we keep sticking to the kind of personal bio format with occasional quips and travels off in other directions, or do we just learn about the guest through the little blurb I put up each week, and of course any Googling you want to do, and then I just discuss with them anything or everything? I like both formats, and in fact format's a funny word because these don't really follow a format, and that's why I guess we've ended up where we are now. A huge issue at the moment is, well, from my point of view anyway, is that I have put my feelers out to a number of women to be guests on the podcast. I had one confirmed who I knew even less than Russell, and so she has, we got to a point where she has not got back to me yet, presumably because she's busy, but also, as I say, it might be a bit odd responding to someone asking you to come and guest on something that maybe isn't as well known as other outlets for your voice. I'm not sure. I have another guest time much closer to coming in the next couple of weeks, a female guest, and that's great. But I still desperately want to even up the balance. I had a private message from a friend who's a listener saying, the podcast is good, but is it just going to be dudes or something similar? And I explained all of what I've explained, that the feelers are out there, but for whatever reason, I haven't had quite the response. I'll be perfectly honest in that same breath and say that I've approached more males. I just have an ever-evolving list of people that I want to ask. So, yeah, I need more ladies on the podcast. If you've got any suggestions, if you'd like to come on, communication lines are always open. verbalhighs@gmail.com, or hit me up on the Facebook page, Verbal Highs Podcast. Please like that, irrespective of the call out for female guests. Just more support for the podcast and its various outlets would be great. I think it's just at Verbal Highs on Twitter. I probably shouldn't say I think it is. My huge media machine, be more accurate than that. So if you can share, make other people aware of the podcast, give feedback on iTunes, super important, even if it's just clicking that star rating once you're subscribed. Even if you listen through the podcasts, if you could subscribe to iTunes and rate, that'd be great. I keep feeling like I'm holding everyone to ransom with this topic each week, but it's all I'm asking at this stage in regards to some kind of reciprocal arrangement for the podcast. If you're enjoying it, please share it. I'm getting 80-90% of the feedback I'm getting is through private messages to me, and it's really great feedback, really constructive feedback, but it seems to be people not actually publicly engaging with this content or sharing it or whatever. So if you could and you're enjoying what I'm doing, that'd be great. Okay. Once again, thanks to Russell. An enjoyable conversation. Another conversation where I feel like I could have, gone for another half an hour on each particular topic and subtopic, but we needed to keep things rolling. So a number of questions answered, another number of questions unanswered. Who knows? Maybe we'll get them in again at some stage.
This is Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs.
Feel free to pop those open as you go. Have you listened to any of these yet?
No, I haven't. Okay. You haven't told me where they are.
Busy, man. I'm going to put the site up.
Okay.
It's verbalhighs.com.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, so basically, if you have listened to long-form interview or conversation podcasts, they go wherever they go. The backbone of it is kind of, I try and trace your kind of history and get some of your insights on your history.
Sure.
But then if we end up talking about electric bicycles for 40 minutes, so be it. So there's not really any plan. Does that sound okay?
All good.
All right, okay. So, and you can correct any of this after I finish this little intro. I'm here with media commentator, journalist, blogger, TV presenter, and sometimes radio broadcaster, founder of Hard News, originally a radio feature on 95 BFM Breakfast. Soon after it turned into what I was originally going to call a blog, but then I realised it's not of the era, because in 92 or 93 it was probably more like a bulletin board posting. Officially became a blog in the early 2000s, has hosted Media 7 on now defunct TVNZ 7, briefly became Media 3 on TV3, then I think the ashes of that perhaps turned into Media Take, which has been on Māori TV the last wee while, nearly there. Has written for Metro Magazine, National Business Review, edited Rip It Up Planet, done some writing for The Spin-Off, organises The Great Blend, which is an event I've attended a couple of and really enjoyed, is a Qantas Media Award winner, a bunch of other places this gentleman has written for, which I'll leave for now, and started his journalistic career at the Christchurch Star.
Indeed, yes.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Russell Brown.
Oh, happy to be here.
So, let's start by talking about time.
Mm-hmm.
As per the post yesterday, time.
Oh, time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that was... I you know why I wrote that is because I've dropped into this unfortunate habit of remonstrating with people who believe crazy things. Well, who I think believe crazy things. People who get their news from Global Research and InfoWars. And I really shouldn't do it. I should let people think what they think. But it's the someone is wrong on the internet, and I thought I should do something different on Facebook. So I wrote about my favourite herb, thyme.
Okay, I didn't realise it had that much of a kind of a philosophical and grounding to it. I know what I did notice in terms of that, though, in terms of the kind of analysis side of my personality, is I was like, isn't that interesting that the most generalist kind of lightweight posts always get the most responses? I ended up, no disrespect, turning the notifications off for it after everyone waxed lyrical about time.
Yeah, no, that always happens on Facebook. When I post a picture of our cat, which I do occasionally, that is the guaranteed, most liked post of all of them.
So
that's fine, actually. I think people who get snobby about cat pictures and that sort of thing on the internet really can go away.
There's a little bit of a. I do want to stick with cooking for a bit, but I've noticed. It is funny, like some of those posts, I kind of gouge how the media in general is doing, because I posted about my chopping board, my brand new bamboo chopping board, the same time Rip It Up. Is that still going?
Officially it still lives. I don't think we'll ever see it again.
Okay, well, it was like that old meme of I bet this cucumber can get more likes than the guy from Nickelback. My chopping board post got more likes than Rip It Up, kind of talking about their new issue. And I was like, what does this mean? What does this mean for information? What does it mean for, kind of what we follow and what we don't? To the herb thing, I agree about thyme, but I need to know, you're kind of a local, why does my rosemary keep dying out here? I would have thought it would be a hardy herb too.
Yeah, I don't know, because I have the same problem in Point Chev.
Right.
Our rosemary's died twice. And you go around to your friend's place, and nearby in Waterview, my friend has a massive rosemary bush, and I don't know why mine doesn't prosper.
A soil thing?
Possibly, yeah.
A direction of the house thing?
Yeah, maybe it was in the shade too much or something like that. But I must admit, I enjoy cooking, but I'm not much of a gardener.
The cooking thing, I noticed you've got a great luxury, I guess, with your blog and these days, and that you have been able to kind of branch off into exactly what we're talking about with what works on the internet, so on kind of more general topics. Is that I saw a while ago you kind of sort of said you were launching a sub sort of cooking blog or topic regularly. Are you still doing that? Are you still doing that alongside the, I guess, more weighty issued stuff?
Yeah, I mean, two parts to that. One, the great joy of having your own blog is that you can be a generalist. And that was actually one of the big appeals for me, was that I could write about the news, I could write about media, I could write about sport, I could write about music.
Yeah.
And that's still really fun. I tend to more stick to stuff I know about now, but yeah. And the other one, Feed, was a specialist food blog, which was a nice idea, and I
think that's what I am referring to.
That was predicated on getting a sponsor, and I
Right.
tried really hard, but it's hard to get sponsorship and advertising income on the internet.
But so let's go back to when you started, because not started your career by any means, but started what eventually, officially, as I say, became called a blog, but it was essentially the radio content posted online. It must have been early on that you didn't have that sort of luxury about posting about your life in general. Like it was very much early on based around media commentary, wasn't it? And sort of go off any direction you want with this. Was there anything around similar like that? Because B, like the other student stations, has always had that luxury of being like a public broadcaster where you can have long form content with people, horror, just speaking. Were you kind of pioneering in that way? Like, who else was just concentrating on media analysis in a broadcast or journalistic sense?
It was funny because it sort of became media analysis. The way it started was, and I tell the story. I was at like an art opening or something, and I saw Graham Hill, who was program director at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, Graham, I heard something particularly witless, and I said, Graham, you need some decent news commentary on your radio station.
Yeah.
And he said, when can you start? So the next week,
Good old student radio.
Exactly.
Get a piece of string and a roll of sellotape and come on in.
And good on them for saying that. The next week I rolled up and I think I used. It was a bit funny, the first one I used bits of an audio interview I'd just done with Mike Moore for Planet magazine, which I was editing at the time. But it soon settled down into the weekly rant that ran for 11 years.
So was it originally just expanding on the news stories of the day, be they media-based or whatever, just commentary on global issues in the media?
Yeah, and about politics. And one of the main motivations was that I felt that people like me, my peers, didn't tend to get a voice in the media. Especially the mainstream daily media totally. And I thought, hang on, I can probably do this. So I did, and I ended up in this quite odd situation where people relied on me for commentary to tell them what to think about stories, which always made me kind of slightly nervous. And I'd get people would come up to me. It still happens, actually. And say,
what do you mean just in social settings?
Yeah,
What does Russell think about this?
Yeah,
Russell will settle this.
But they'd say things like, "Oh, yours is the only news that I pay any attention to." It's like, what? Oh, no, you still have to read the paper.
Yeah.
You still do. But it was nice that it became valued like that. And one of the other nice things was that it had quite a big offshore readership because people would be at university and then they'd go overseas and do other things, and they could keep following it because from fairly early on, as you say, it was posted to there was a listserv, any website that wanted it could carry it.
Yeah.
And that was quite nice. And I must say, I lived in London 86 to 91, and it would have been great to have had that to keep me in touch with home. Well, it would have been nice to have had the internet, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I was thinking back then, you specifically said people at universities and stuff. I mean, that would have been when the most reliable, or even just, it wasn't even populous connection to the internet. So I suppose being at uni was the great luxury to have contact, right? I mean, who else kind of 95, 96 would have been online overseas more than here?
Yeah, I mean, most of the people on in the early 90s were doing it via university. Yeah. I wasn't because I wasn't at university, but I signed up with one of the early commercial ISPs, Icons. Yeah. And it was kind of amazing just going into the Icons news group and thinking, hey, hang on, there's these really smart people who have prose styles and can write and can express ideas. Yeah. And who are journalists.
I'm a stickler for the dates.
93.
93, yeah. So in 93, you had your home computer connected to the internet. And then I think
tough. It was really difficult to use the internet back then.
Yeah, you had to have a lot of patience and I guess really know what you're after. But if the wrong thing downloaded, it took a long time. But the public hard news didn't go online until about 96, did it? So a few years later?
No, it was actually fairly early on. It was it was a little while after I got online, so it might have even been by the end of 93. Right,
and so was that? I mean, was that you knowing you were being kind of pioneering with computing, or just like, oh, I've got the internet on, I should chuck it up there?
Well, it sort of became, even back then, it was obvious that the thing to do was to give it away.
Yeah.
Which, of course, has become problematic for the media these days. But I basically took the view that anyone who wanted the text, because initially I would literally finish reading it on the radio and put the script in the bin on my way out of the studio. Yeah. And then, hang on, maybe I should hang on to this. Yeah. And then there was a guy called Mark Profit was the first one, who was one of the early internet geek types, and he set up a listserv for it. So there was a mailing list from very, very early on. And that was actually a really good way of staying in touch with people, even much later on.
And so I won't dwell on this too much longer. So outside of universities and I think some government departments and so on, were you one of two hands full of private people putting stuff regularly up online in New Zealand, or
there weren't
was that small, was it?
There weren't many of us publishing. Yeah, put it that way. Yeah. And it was quite nice because you got to meet a lot of people, including in person, because we'd meet up. Yeah. And I kind of almost accidentally became an internet guy. Yeah. Which got me a job at Computer World. Yeah. Because I'd already started writing a computer column for The Listener that I kind of bluffed my way into. It was pretty bad initially, but after about a year, people were saying, "Oh, so where did you get your comp-sci degree?" No. But that was also really good because I was covering the early days of government websites.
Yeah.
You know, and people like Colin Jackson, who set up the initial sort of Skunkworks New Zealand government site. So it was fun being around while all that stuff was happening.
Because you come from a traditional press journalist background, don't you? So, what had you kind of been doing before that? What did the journalism career look like prior? And we'll get to whether the putting the stuff online and ending up on BFM was a sort of a happy accident that led to the next phase, as it were, or the next era.
Yeah, it was sort of traditional and sort of not, because I started at the Christchurch Star. I was one of the last newspaper cadets in the country.
Yeah.
So I didn't do a tech course or anything.
Oh, right, so you didn't do the equivalent of AUT or whatever? You just went out with the older guy?
Those courses existed, but you could just go straight from school to a cadetship, as it was then. But
that obviously look at like your English achievements through high school. And
I got the job that way. But I did a year at the Christchurch Star and kind of spent a lot of time going out and seeing couples on their diamond wedding anniversaries and that sort of thing. And it actually wasn't that much fun. And then it was 1981, the year of the Springbok tour, and everyone else got to go out and report on it and be stationed on rooftops. And
you're here. I'm here with Edith and Bill.
Yeah, no. Well, I was the junior, so I had to sit back in the newsroom and monitor the radio.
Yeah.
And then the next year, the cadet by tradition went to the Timaru branch office.
Yeah.
And Timaru was a trial. It actually ended up being quite fun.
Because you're born and bred Aucklander originally, weren't you?
No. Born. Oh God, I've been all over. Born in Hutt Hospital in the Hutt Valley. And since then lived in Hamilton, Invercargill, Christchurch, Greymouth, back to Christchurch.
But so you actually left the North Island to go to the South Island to pursue the journalism?
No. I grew up mostly in Christchurch.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've taken you off the other keel of that story.
That's all right. But by the time I'd served a year in Timaru, I was due to go back to the Christchurch newsroom. But in the meantime, I'd been writing some reviews, and I wrote one for Gary Steele's mag, In Touch. But then wrote another one for Rip It Up, and then some more, and heard through the dance exponents manager that Murray was keen for me to apply for this new job of deputy editor.
Were you doing these on spec, Russell, as it were?
I was sending them in, but Murray paid me.
Yeah, good.
And so at the end of 1983, Murray came down on the train, and we had dinner, and he offered me the job.
Wow!
So I knew my life was changing.
Wow.
So
you knew you didn't want to be at a small town rag for the rest of time.
No, exactly. I think I was always going to be more suited to other kinds of journalism. And Rip It Up was amazing. What an incredible opportunity, because there was so much happening in music at that time. I was quite plugged into it. And Murray was an incredibly tolerant editor who kind of let me be quite indulgent at times. But I think it was a really important part of my growing up.
So what were you reviewing being in Timaru? It wouldn't have been shows, would it?
No, because I'd go up to Christchurch nearly every weekend, actually. That initial review for Rip It Up was at a dance at Lincoln College, featuring the Clean and the dance exponents.
Oh, wow.
And it was the weirdest thing, because the students had all kind of had a food fight, and it was the place itself was really weird. And I wrote this highly impressionistic review. And the funny thing is that Murray recognised the imprint of my typewriter and the way I formatted it, and realised that I was the guy who the year before had written a very snotty letter accusing Rip It Up of being a paid advertisement for the New Zealand record industry. Snob.
So when he came, Murray, how do you say, what's that? Not revenge, because he treated you right, but that's quite the... I can't think of the phrase, but for someone to hold on to that document and then think to compare, that's the same you.
Yeah, but as you say, he absolutely did the right thing.
Yeah.
It just still amuses me that he knew it. He told me a little while after I'd started working for him, but yeah, I mean that was great fun being able to do that, and I had. Before
you move on, I don't want to get you in a situation that dear Jeremy did with Gore many years ago. But what was the problem with Timaru?
I think part of the problem was that most of the people my age, who
Yeah.
were first year out of school or second year out of school, who I would have gotten along with, had shifted to Christchurch
Yeah.
to do university study. And at the end of that year, they came back, and I actually had a really good last 2-3 months there.
Yeah.
With this band called Say Yes to Apes, who were this famously obscure, crazy, wacky cult band. So I actually had a really good time.
Yeah.
Right towards the end, but initially it was like, what is there to do in this town? The guy I'm flatting with is completely weird. There only seem to be bogans here. it was quite tough, and
Proverbial
I would
fish
just-
out, the fish out of water.
Yeah, I would just go up to Christchurch every weekend.
And so the Rip It Up position's based in Auckland.
Yeah.
You get up there at what age?
I think I was just about to... Yeah, I was 19 when I got up.
And it was editing or writing?
Deputy editor.
Deputy editor.
And I actually discovered I was a reasonably good sub-editor.
Yeah.
Without being trained.
Yeah.
I think I've always had a good sense for that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
in the end, I was actually...
So not just punctuation and so on, but a sense of the kind of tone and rhythm of the magazine overall. So all the different articles don't.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I was actually subbing most of the mag, and when we got a computer, I was typing the whole damn thing in. And I've never learned to type properly.
You're like me. I just
Yeah.
wrote a thesis, Russell, with the old. I think I've advanced from 2 to 3 finger fast.
Yeah,
pick.
I think I get up to about 4 sometimes.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm fast at times.
Yeah. And so, what does music journalism and the music scene look like in what are we now? Early 80s.
It was vigorous and full of life then.
Yeah.
Because we needed music journalists as gatekeepers. Because your ability to find out what something sounded like was really quite limited. If you had student radio, that might help.
Yeah.
But basically, you needed to read the NME.
Yeah.
Or you needed to read Rip It Up if it
Yeah.
was locally to find out what was good and what you should take a punt on, because you had to buy the damn records.
And then I guess because we could argue subjectivity versus is good music and bad music and so on. But I guess it'll be a kind of a mix of both, where you'd find your favourite writers in terms of, okay, if that person says this is blah 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 blah, they've got similar ears to me and so on. So I really see that gatekeeper role. So how many of there were you gatekeeping in New Zealand music wise at the time? Again, a handful.
No, there was, oddly enough, compared to now, there was a lot. Because
Yeah.
if you talk to music publicists now, they sometimes despair of getting anyone to cover what they need covered.
Why?
Because there just isn't that much. You look at the Herald now. There used to be... The Herald and the Auckland Star used to have big, solid music sections and name music writers. Colin Hogg was the guy.
Yeah.
Whereas now you see very few reviews. And you'll sometimes see live reviews, but
then
compared to how it was,
yeah. But I don't know. But then for someone who's hung, a lot on, the potential of the internet, are you kind of saying at the same time that there aren't really blogs cutting through in New Zealand? Like it sounds like a well-reasoned argument for traditional media where you don't have a lot of competition of voices.
Yeah, I think the whole role of music journalists has changed quite a lot, particularly with the rise of music blogs. I mean, back in the 80s, it was guys writing epic on tour stories or controversial reviews, and I loved all that stuff. I modelled myself to some extent on some of those NME writers, but now you've got things like Pitchfork, but you've also got music blogs where they're almost more akin to radio programming than
That's interesting. What do you mean by
writing,
that?
because you want to be first with the music.
Yeah,
because embeddable players, you can actually present the music yourself. You don't just you can't. It's not just telling people it's good. You say, look, here it is, and I'm the first one to tell you about it. I think that being first.
That's right.
Is
I got the MP3 up first.
Yeah,
exactly. And now you made me think about it. And you'd have better knowledge than me with this, but I can't actually name a list of really prominent New Zealand just music bloggers.
You've got. There's quite a variety of kind of styles, because you've got people like, say, Peter McLennan, who doesn't blog all the time, but blogs from the point of view of being an obsessive record collector and a musician. Someone like Martin Pepperell, who's very focused on being first. You know, to spot talent, and he's really good at that.
And can write too, so it's not just a little press release blurb with an MP3.
Yeah. And then you've got close listeners, as I call them, like Gary Steele and Graham Reed, who kind of have a relationship to music that I envy in some ways, because they actually are. They listen in detail.
Yeah.
But there still aren't a lot of us.
Do you think that?
I mean, there's Smithies as well. Grant Smithies is a machine.
Yeah. Is he mainly blogging now?
No, he's actually writing a lot for Fairfax.
Right.
Sometimes under assumed names as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did wonder where. Yeah, I haven't seen as much of his. There you go. So I have to look into his. What do they call them? Non-diplomers. So I don't know. Has the Martin Pepperells of today? You know, I'm always really interested in this constant dialogue about, you know, what the internet's given us, but what it's taken away. Do they ultimately, and I'm talking like on a getting through life and a career and paying the bills and so on, you know, have they got a easier lot or a more difficult lot than when you rolled up to rip it up when you did?
It's harder to get paid. I mean, but that's the same for musicians as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's that you've got this enormous reach potentially, but it's really hard to get paid, and it would be difficult to see a magazine like Rip It Up surviving now.
Yeah.
Particularly as it was, because it was quite brave, and Murray would piss off advertisers.
Yeah.
He would run bad reviews of records, even though he knew it would piss off, you know, the record company.
Did it have a golden era, Russell, like that kind of late 90s period of BFM and the other then BNet stations where, because I have to assume that advertising was the main, if not the only revenue, where you're at a point where you could kind of two-finger them and still get their advertising dollar?
Yeah,
you know?
I don't think it was ever quite that secure, but no, there was certainly a golden era, and there was lots of advertising to be had. I mean, we saw the same thing in the 90s with Planet magazine.
Yeah.
I mean, we had big brands like Sony would not only buy advertising with us, they would let us design the pages.
Yeah.
And it just would not happen now. I mean, that's another thing that's really changed in the internet era is advertising.
Yeah.
It's become much more robotic, much more automated, and much less interesting, I think. And it's certainly, I mean, there's no way
because there's no budget for, I'm guessing, because there's no budget for kind of Mad Men-esque style campaigns.
No, exactly.
With a writer and a graphic guy sitting there, you know.
And there's no room for independent publishers.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a really great little era in the 90s for magazines where you could have a readership of 5,000. And if it was the right readers, you could actually do quite well.
Yeah.
But that's now, you know, I mean, we were, I mean, we don't have as many readers now on public address, but we would have maybe 200,000 page impressions a month, and we'd have 50,000 upscale readers, according to Google, maybe even more. So I think something was 80, but that was bullshit. You know, but there was no way of presenting that audience in a way that would attract advertisers, and it's become worse now. Programmatic advertising is just, you know,
what advertising, sorry?
Programmatic, which is basically computers buying ads. It's a constant auction that's going on all the time.
So it's using the information, say Google gathers on you as a consumer and a web searcher to generate advertising.
And multiple ad networks bid against each other. You know, I've got this inventory that I can let you have for, and it's all done on a computer.
Try entering a word into Facebook that maybe an update that is not genuine or whatever, and that an advertisement for something around that word or that topic or whatever will come up super quickly. It's quite amazing, but kind of completely and utterly redundant in a lot of ways as well. Yeah, exactly. That may be the next crunch, is that, you know, everyone thinks maybe this is working. I'm not entirely sure if it is, and that actually relates to the fact. Well, you just sorry to cut you off. For me, I just have ad blockers on everywhere, so you know it's tough.
I always feel I should watch them.
Yeah.
Sometimes I switch an ad blocker on, but I mean it's become so sort of devalued and corrupted advertising online, and that's actually one of the things behind the whole fake news phenomenon. Is in a lot of cases those fake news sites aren't malicious. They're just
Generating clicks.
Generating clicks.
Yeah.
They're not,
But isn't that-
they're
but
not
hang on.
politically malicious.
But hang on a second, isn't that malicious just by the rules of capitalism and so on, to create fake content to generate cash? Can't you say that's
Oh, yeah, no.
societally malicious?
No, it's evil, yes.
Yeah, I guess it's not malicious, but it's evil.
Well, it's not often not politically driven, put it that way.
Well, that's because I did write. I don't like to have a huge dossier or a series of topics or whatever, but it's interesting you inadvertently segued there, because we may or may not come back to your career, Russell. We'll see how we go. I had fake news and post-truth written down here to as just bullet points to bring up with you. Obviously not about music journalism or necessarily what you've written about and so on, but how has that changed the information landscape since you started as a journalist? You know, what's going on? Again, a very broad question. What's changed in terms of accessibility to information and the validity of that information kind of since you started?
Well, I used to think it was really exciting, and I guess I still do, that we had access to so many voices and so many perspectives.
That's right, because we've been getting a bit dystopian about the internet in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, because the New Zealand I grew up in as a kid, there was one TV channel. Yeah, there weren't many versions of the truth, basically.
Yeah.
And it was a real... it felt revolutionary when suddenly there was room for all these new voices, and I would include, the original Hard News as a radio broadcast.
Yeah.
The funny thing about that is, I think it was until 1972, it was illegal. It was a breach of broadcasting regulations to express a controversial opinion on the radio.
Really?
Yep.
So
yeah, radio was bolted down because of the way it had featured in politics back in the 1930s. So,
well, we went through an era where our Prime Minister would read the news from his office around that time. Yeah.
So I mean, it still is exciting. I mean, I can read The Guardian is amazing, and the New York Times and the Washington Post. But I think it was kind of a wake-up call when, I can't remember who did the analysis, but was it Wired? The top 5 election campaign news stories in the last 3 months of the campaign on Facebook were all fake news.
And were they generated, like you said, by essentially click capitalists, or were they generated by either political interests who spread bullshit?
a mix, I reckon, and that's still one of the distinguishing things, is that it's so opaque.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go into a DNS lookup and find out, who owns the site, or who owns the domain name, but you can't really get past that.
I talked to Dave Roper last week, ex-promoter. We actually ended up talking politics the first 20 minutes or half an hour, and I suggested to him that there's a real argument here, not so much shock horror the internet's created, so many voices that inevitably we have a whole lot of bullshit content, but I think there's a real argument here for audiences to be more knowledgeable. I don't think there's enough. Maybe there's more. I haven't been to primary school or secondary school in 20 years, but I don't think the general public has enough tools in their basket, as it were, to disseminate good information from bad.
No, and
I think that cuts to the heart of the problem, rather than, okay, everyone keep producing bullshit. It's going to keep happening, but we need, as a larger population, to learn how to sift through it.
Yeah, and I've actually been saying that for years.
Says a media communications tutor.
Kids should be taught the basics of how to weigh up information and tell good information from bad.
Which is what a first year essay is, or last 2 years of high school, yeah. But definitely within the media.
But I think you've got this new thing now where people literally don't want to do that. They want to believe things that confirm their biases.
Have you ever argued, and I don't anymore, and I never will again, have you ever argued with a serious conspiracy theorist online?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it cuts to the heart of exactly that statement you just made.
Yeah.
It's like you cannot, I don't know, you can't reason with someone like that who's made up their mind, which I find fucking terrifying, because it's like, can't you see this? Can't I present you with this evidence?
Yeah, no, and also the dismissing of any story, no matter what its contents, because it's from the mainstream media. It's like, really?
Yeah. The Herald's still got quite a good investigative journalism team.
They have a very good investigative journalism team.
If you know where to look online.
Yeah. Actually, that's probably
it's very hard to find from their front page.
And this is worth talking about before we move on. There's a reason it's hard to find, is that online is kind of a law unto itself at the newspaper websites, and you'll find that the paper's best journalists tear their hair out struggling to get their stories on the homepage, let alone above the fold
Absolutely.
on the homepage.
Hello,
And
clicks again.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
And instead you'll get all these risible clickbait stories. And I think the Herald's pulled back a little bit from that, but it was getting awful for a while.
You know, it's crazy. It's like it's this race to the bottom. This is probably a question and a statement to you. So it's this race to the bottom, but then the Herald's one example of many. I'm not going to talk about the Herald here, but let's use it as an example. So it's this kind of race to the bottom for clicks. But then why are they still then paying for good journalists to write good stories? Is it because there's still people very senior in the organisation who want quality journalism and information for the public to remain?
Yeah, I still think there's some belief.
Is there a battle of the boardroom and the...
Yeah.
You know?
There is. And that battle can swing either way at times as well.
Yeah.
But no, there is a belief in journalism there.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote this, I wrote a chapter for a book last year called Don't Dream It's Over, Reimagining Journalism in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Yeah.
And pointed out that for all the existential threats to our trade, journalism is actually much more interesting and much more aware of itself and exciting than it was when I started at the Christchurch Star. It was pretty comfortable back then. Now, I think because of this existential threat, we have to think what we're here for.
What do you mean existential threat? The threat of journalists disappearing?
Will what we do be viable in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And there's also this other thing, and I noticed it at the Canon Media Awards last year. More younger journalists there, because it used to be really, really fucking dull. More younger journalists there. It did. It used to be fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
More younger journalists there, more women, and also people winning awards for stuff they had done for as many as 3 different platforms, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So, I think Hayden Donnell at the Spin-Off won one for a feature he'd written in 1972, which is The Barkers in Store Mag, which Duncan Grieve edit. I don't know if he still edits it, but...
Hang on a second. So how did Duncan Grieve from the Spin-Off re-earth the 1972 article, which then won an award?
No. The magazine's called 1972.
I've never heard of that. I actually haven't heard of that. So it's 1972.
It's sort of Gen X thing, I think.
Hey, I'm Gen X.
Yeah. Well, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And you've got, people like Kirsty Johnston at the Herald.
Yeah.
She actually has driven the news agenda, and I think her stories have been very well read. Yeah. And she's passionate and driven. So you've got people like her doing that work, and Matt Nippett's work is brilliant. But it's interesting what's happening to that investigative team. It's not apparent to the reader, but they've decentralised. David Fisher has gone to live up north.
Yeah.
Jared Savage is living in Mount Maunganui.
Yeah.
Because it's more practical for them.
Yeah.
To maybe do less work. I don't know what deals they're on, whether it's probably not full time, but they can sell up in Auckland and move out.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that as well.
Yeah. What's the significance of that, Russell? Just what are you trying to sort of saying there, that people can spread far and wide, and
but also that they can't afford to stay.
I get you.
They can't afford to stay in Auckland.
Yeah.
And
so everyone Skypes every morning and tries to.
Yeah. I guess so. They're still doing good work, but wow.
Yeah.
It is. It's a strange time, and
It is. Look, I think there's huge scope out there for anyone. This is obvious, to go out and cover whatever they want, however they want. But a lot of what we talk about cuts back to that absolute reality of life, which is getting by, paying the bills, and looking to your future. And I am a huge believer in what I'm teaching at AUT, which obviously is comms. But I look at, I don't know, I just look at people graduating and I go, man, I hope with your skills and so on, that I hope it's kind of like, I hope it works out for you, man. you know?
Oh, absolutely. One year
I think it was different to say that 20 or 30 years ago. You just talked about walking into a cadetship, at the age of 17, 18. The world, it's
Yep. Yeah, and I think it was the journalism school, or it was the comm school prize giving at AUT 3 or 4 years ago. I emceed, and I was amazed at how bright these kids were. And I thought, how many of you are actually going to go into journalism, though? And I don't think many of them were.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. It's like the Starship Enterprise up there these days, though. Like some of the equipment I teach on, like, so I do a paper where they have to make a radio doco at the end, first years, on Pro Tools and so on. It's like, man, I would have crawled over broken glass to have any of this gear. People sitting in a room of amazing tech. So, whether or not they end up officially, in the industry and that's their full time, or enough projects to make a career. I hope at least, coming back to the main kind of media theory papers and stuff with it, they go out as citizens, and I say this to them at the beginning, who actually know how to disseminate good information from bad. I think there's an argument for that part of the comms course to somehow be put into the water in New Zealand and offshore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, everyone's talking about Trump. Let's see how we go with this, Russell. What's going to happen to the world in 2 or 3 weeks' time?
Don't know.
Well, I don't expect you to go, here's what's going to happen.
Well, it's almost that you've almost got this situation, and maybe that was the case even during the campaign. There's so much bullshit and craziness that it actually, one thing starts to obscure another. Because it's all very well to, respond to Trump slagging off, predictably, Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
But was that a really good way of distracting everyone from the fact that none of his cabinet picks have been had a background check from the FBI, or B, been Congressional Ethics Office vetted?
Are you saying that he's clever enough to be putting up smoke screens, Russell? Or people around him? Is his Twitter? What you're saying, his Twitter account's smarter than it might appear at first glance?
That's possible, or
maybe people put the bill through at midnight.
Maybe people around him let him do that. But on the other hand, you also got to think that maybe it is a bit crazy, because these tweets all happen at 3 a.m. What the hell's going on in that man's head?
Well, I imagine he's got a fine selection of scotches in his
Well, he
cabinet.
claims not to drink.
Yeah.
But
Coke? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe actually. But it is all that sniffing during the debates.
I hear what you're saying. Like, I don't know. We all don't know, do we? But it's like, I don't think he's the sharpest crayon in the box, but then in a lot of ways he really is. And they say he's not listening to people around him he needs to listen to. But someone who he hears has had to have said something to him about the Twitter account and that general attitude to putting out information. So maybe you're right. Maybe it's a much cleverer smoke screen than we think.
It's really hard to know, because there are just so many conflicts of interest, and there's cabinet choices. These are people who
go back to
in
the
some
Middle
cases
Ages.
Simply incompetent.
Yeah.
In most cases, actively hostile to the portfolio they're supposed to be taking on. And I guess that's part of one thing I've been thinking about with all this is that there's a kind of anti-establishment nihilism, and it's abroad at the moment, and it's not confined to the right. One of the weirdest things is that the craziness has been on the alt-right and the alt-left. And and I've argued on Facebook with people. I've gone and looked at their Facebook page. You're a greenie, right? You're a greenie, and you live in Dunedin.
Yeah.
But you think Trump's okay.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of... And I thought, maybe I am more establishment than I realised, because I do see why the major institutions that we have are there. Things like the World Trade Organization and all those agreements. And there is a reason that they were there, and they were put there after the traumatic experience of a world war where millions of people died. Yeah. We don't really want to go back to petty nationalism and trade wars.
Well, I think what you're saying again, because I've seen that extreme left dialogue on social media, especially leading up to the last New Zealand election, where I'm left leaning. I'm left, but some of that discussion and some of the ideas being thrown forth, and just some of the vitriol, I was like, this feels like the far right sort of dialogue, but in a kind of, yeah. And I think it cuts back to, again, you said, I can't remember how you phrased it, but anti-establishment is what you said. Isn't that anti-establishment, again, like almost kind of doing the research, looking for the good information? I'm over here. This is where I am. And do you think, there's a link there?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because, I mean, Syria is a really good example.
Yeah.
The number of far-left New Zealanders I've argued with about Syria who have bought into this one very narrow narrative that that basically the Assad's just taking out the trash with the help of the Russians. And you try and point out to them, well, no, actually this started with a genuine pro-democracy movement. And amid the fog of war, even that movement was corrupted somewhat. But Assad actually killed a lot of people, and either in his jails or on the streets, and that's how the war started. No, it was America. It was like, no, America hasn't actually intervened much in Syria this time. America's adventurism in the Middle East has been disastrous often, and we only have ISIS because Iraq was invaded basically. But people are so wedded to this narrative of American imperialism that they cannot get their heads around the fact that what happened here was that Russia and Assad targeted civilian populations in a way that amounted to a war crime. They starved out civilian populations.
So in other words, they're not getting that nuance they need in their information diet. You said bullshit before. I read this great article today. I'll link it to you later on. Who's it by? Have you ever heard of Laurie Penny?
Yes.
Okay. Bullshit is not simply a set of fibs, but an entire register of speaking. Bullshit is the language of business, which is increasingly the language of politics. But in business, everyone knows the game. Everyone sitting around a boardroom table knows that everyone else is playing a game, trying to get away with it as much as possible. That makes the game fair in its way. In politics, people don't know they're playing, and if you're involved in a game you don't know you're playing, chances are you are the ball. It's one paragraph of about 9 or 10 of the best paragraphs I've read in ages. On bullshit. Katie Hopkins, this is a woman she was referring to who said that racism was a dead term or something. Katie Hopkins is a bullshit artist. Donald Trump is a bullshit artist. Nigel Farage is a bullshit artist. These people are faces of the age of bullshit, an age that defies any charge of hypocrisy because the con is open and shameless. Goes on to talk about how Putin's a master of bullshit and smoke and mirrors.
Oh, I'm absolutely obsessed with Putin's Russia at the moment, actually.
So why don't we call it the bullshit era rather than the post-truth era? I think it's got a better ring to it.
Maybe. No, I think it's gone beyond bullshit. It's people have lost touch with what's even true. But I can't believe how many apparent lefties still haven't caught up with the fact that Russia is not anymore anything like a socialist country. It's a mafia economy run for the benefit of
the very few super rich.
Yeah.
I think even less in numbers per capita than the US even.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's very concentrated wealth. It's so corrupt. The Putin's decision to go for scary fantasy nationalism in the last 2 years has just been. But I mean, Russian TV is terrifying. They get talk about fake news. They almost get nothing but.
Well, I talked about this last week with Dave. He's essentially got a Goebbels in his team. I forget the guy's name. A very good master of kind of misinformation, then correct information, and a combination of fake and real. And essentially, the idea put forth is that Putin's kind of one of the greatest PR guys ever in terms of how Russia's going and what Russia is compared to what it actually is. And again, if you dig a little bit deeper, it's a lot different. Let's talk about drugs.
Yeah, my specialist subject.
I've had two weeks in a row where we've gone down talking about politics. It's great. I mean, it's of the era. I mean, so we didn't even answer what's going to happen to the world in 3 weeks. So I'll close that off by, and you're welcome to add any comments before we talk about drugs, and more drugs. I would hope that the president of the USA, whoever they are in a middle management position in a lot of ways. So I would hope that for all his nuttiness or whatever it is, it all can't go completely unchecked. And, I think some people confuse president of the USA with kind of king or dictator or ruler of them all. And so basically all I'm putting out there is I hope whatever he tries to do out to here gets pulled back to about here.
It's going to be a significant test.
That was a hand gesture, folks.
Yeah, it's going to be a significant test of the American system.
Yeah.
The thing that does worry me is that the Republicans have control of both houses. Because I think the Republican Party in America has just become utterly corrupted. It's just become a hate factory. It's horrible. There are some real, genuine
the Democrats haven't?
No, the Democrats.
Not to the same
Democrats
extent.
have their issues, but there's been a real kind of crusade against reason in that party for a long time. I mean, you look. The climate change is a really good example. They've all convinced themselves it's a hoax, and it's just there's no way you can believe that.
Which is which makes me actually more angry than a lot of things, because it's one of the most utterly selfish. It's the ball we live on, man.
Yeah.
It's quite simple, really, eh?
Yeah. But it's another one of those things where posting links and explaining things and providing facts just does not work. And I don't know what you do.
Yeah, I'll leave that there. I don't know what you do. There's been a lot of that. It remains to be seen. Goodness, we're going to get through about 4% of your background. That's fine. So the reason I mentioned drugs is I know leading up to From Zero, which is the podcast series, which I found really interesting and informative, by the way, which is probably what you want. I knew some of the stuff, obviously, as you always do, but I learned a lot, particularly about kind of prehistory, for me anyway, of drug use in New Zealand. I know leading up to that you'd been doing some writing for the New Zealand Drug Foundation, is that correct?
Yeah, I have. That's almost my favourite work, actually.
So, okay, well, if you say that, explain a little bit about that first, and then we'll ease into the podcast. Would you like me to crack you another?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Speaking of drugs.
I rode my bike here. I'm allowed a beer.
Okay, New Zealand Drugs Foundation, writing about drugs.
And the funny thing is, it actually started... My interest in that journalistically actually started quite a long time ago, because one of the things that motivated me to do the original Hard News on BFM was that drug issues never got talked about sensibly. Because back then, man, the Herald was just absurd. It would run these ridiculous 1950s editorials about cannabis legalisation. It was like, oh, come on. This isn't even... Your facts aren't even right.
Reefer Madness.
Yeah. And then when we were doing Planet, I did a marijuana issue that I'm still really proud of.
Yeah. And this is what era?
I think
early mid-90s.
Yeah, early 90s. So 1993, I think we did that one. And that was fun to do. And then later on, the work for the Drug Foundation's magazine, Matters of Substance, came up. And I just love doing that. And it's interesting because every time they give me a topic, I go, oh, God, do I have to do that? That looks really difficult. But I learn a lot doing the research.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot about the new Hep C antivirals now.
Right.
And it is really interesting work to do. It pays quite well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it's publications like that don't rely on advertising.
Yeah. They'd have a government purse, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Ultimately, most, not all, because they are a charitable foundation, but the majority of their income comes from the government via the Royal Society. But yeah, I love doing it because you can actually talk you can talk about drugs in a public health context and be honest, and actually talk about evidence.
It's interesting you say that, because you've just made me think of a question in terms of every, I guess, outlet or funding body or whatever has an agenda. So can you be that, the word slips my mind, like, you're not under any pressure to toe a particular line?
No, that's actually a really good question.
Yeah.
It's something I've thought about.
Neutral, sorry.
It certainly helps that I'm comfortable with the Drug Foundation's philosophy, which is
harm reduction.
Harm reduction under the banner of evidence-based drug policy.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of the way I've thought about a lot of different topics along the way. So I'm comfortable with that. That said, it was really good to do the podcast and be determining the content myself and not relying on the brief from my editor at Matters of Substance.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was nice to do that for a change. So, yeah, but I mean, the best thing I've done working for Matters of Substance was last year going to UNGAS, the UN General Assembly Special Session on Drugs, which was a fascinating and slightly dispiriting at times experience. The UN is a weird place. I did laugh at
some of your commentary around it.
Yeah.
The magazines getting, or the flyers getting confiscated and so on. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant opportunity, and it's such interesting stuff to write about.
So you're not under you have neutrality. Back to that question, you have journalistic. You've got proper. You're not under pressure to go a particular way with articles.
No,
you just rely on the evidence and write up the information.
Yeah,
based
exactly.
On the data presented.
And I mean, the P houses thing was a good example. I got the brief for that, but I actually ended up going quite a long way beyond the brief because I got some sources and I got leaks and stuff. And,
this is in the magazine.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the whole, P contamination hysteria. And I found some really good people to talk to about that. And that was a really interesting one because it was a classic example of emotional response and how these testing companies in particular got really good at telling people that they had a problem.
Emotional response for commercial gain.
Yeah.
Can I paraphrase for a second, listeners? If someone has smoked meth in your house, it doesn't mean you necessarily need to spend thousands of dollars getting it decontaminated. Is that about the...
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah, and it was good that, there were a handful of scientists prepared to stand up and actually say what the actual scientific truth was there. But I mean, that was fascinating because that was actually really satisfying because I went from blogging about it and saying, "Hang on, this seems wrong," and looking up some of the papers and still thinking it sounded wrong, to actually being paid to write a major feature on it.
From educated gut feeling to serious investigative piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think over the years, I noticed I came back to New Zealand in 2007-ish, but I was coming back before then regularly because I was only in Melbourne. And I saw the whole, and this is way before I went down the lines of kind of, I guess, being a media scholar, as it were. But I noticed a hysteria around meth in New Zealand in terms of media response, which then led to public response, which, and I'm not downplaying the hugely addictive drug it is to many, but that seemed to outweigh more rational discussion, facts, the history of that drug. Again, I come back to that reefer madness kind of cultural meme. It felt like that in a lot of ways, and I think that's really closed off a lot of discussion around that drug in particular. It feels like something you can't talk about, even with quite reasonable people, without someone having a really response.
Yeah, that's true, and it was actually fun. I was talking to Chris Stapp, from Deja Voodoo, who did a song called P, and that was almost the unsayable at the time. You know,
I smoked
P and I didn't cut anyone's hands off, and the truth was that most people who smoke meth will become difficult to be around at some point if they do it for an extended period. It's almost a guarantee. Yeah. Well, but they won't cut anyone's hands off, probably.
Yeah.
Though you might have to ask them to stop coming around to your house because they're annoying.
So what did you with the podcast? What was the agenda you came to it from? And there's so many you could come from. So you've said, was it to do with what you learnt from the New Zealand Drug Foundation? Was it to do with the fact that maybe that sensible drug use is okay in the right time and right place? Is it what made you want to do a thing on drugs?
Some of it came from stuff I'd written for the Drug Foundation. I mean, I'd actually the history one was based on a cover story I did for Matters of Substance. Yeah. And a number of the other topics I'd touched on. But again, it was just that thing of, let's have a sensible discussion. Can we just actually have a sensible discussion about what the facts of this are?
Do you think that's getting better?
It's funny. The drug policy is really odd because everything is changing except the law.
Yeah.
The National Drug Policy, authored by Peter Dunn, who I think gets a bum rap quite often, is a very good document.
Yeah, it is.
It's humane, it's sensible, but there's a limit to what it can mean when John Key, and I presume now Bill English, will say the law is not changing. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I've heard that the most simple way to put it, or what I've been told anyway, that makes a huge amount of sense, is it's political suicide, kind of going out with drugs as one of your main agendas in an election and so on. Do you think that's? Do you think, despite the fact that pretty much all New Zealanders have tried cannabis or whatever the stats are, I don't know them, that it's a bit freaky, doing that.
That's the received wisdom. Yeah. But then, on the other hand, you had 2 polls done on cannabis law last year, one by the Drug Foundation and one funded by Normal, and they both came out with almost identical results. 2/3 of people want to see some reform of cannabis law, and around 85-90% want to see action on medical cannabis.
See, so maybe the meth hysteria has had good flow-on effects for funny old cannabis.
I think there's something to that.
Can't everyone just smoke joints again?
And another thing that came up in the course of the podcast, which I'd never realised, is the way that that meth is pushing out cannabis in some communities.
It makes sense for all the reasons outlined in the podcast. I mean, even point A, whether it's a indoor grow room or a outdoor like it was 20 years ago, that's a shitload of space for a lot less money, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a lot more risk.
It's actually quite hard. It's risky.
Big glowing thumb in the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It uses a lot of electricity. It's easy to get caught. It's big. It's smelly. And frankly, your customers aren't quite as desperate as meth users.
So have you found or been approached or felt in the winds of the media any murmur of potential change or discussion or movement based on the podcast?
I've had a number of other journalists contact me privately and say, "Well done." So that's nice.
Absolutely, there's that. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think. Well, no. I mean, that last episode was a plea for a proper discussion, and maybe if it had helped in progress towards that, I think that's really good.
Yeah.
I'd be really happy about that.
Or if a few years down the line it's cited, in some kind of discussion.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I always like seeing myself cited because I have no academic background.
Oh no, I don't mean cited in the academic sense. I mean cited in a parliamentary debate or whatever.
Yeah, that's nice too.
Okay.
It's always nice when they. I think there will be some progress. I like the Greens policy. I think it's not bad. It's actually relatively conservative, for what they could have done.
Yeah.
But it makes sense where they've stitched themselves up. And it was a nice idea to say a psychoactive substances like process for approval of recreational substances. But being the Green Party, they can't approve of animal testing.
Right.
And you're not going to get any substance through conventional drug testing without animal testing at the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 or 10 years' time.
Yeah. It's necessary evil, you're saying.
Yeah.
Unfortunate as it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I felt like there was something else I wanted to ask about the podcast. We're doing well, by the way. We're at just over an hour, about 20 minutes left.
Woo.
Are you waiting to go?
Not at all. Thought we were doing well.
Drugs podcast. All your writing and research beforehand, having lived a life up until now, drug use around you in your community and whatever. So all that knowledge and information that went up to it, what did you find most fascinating that you didn't know before you did the podcast? It doesn't have to be one, key thing, but was there something you took away you just had no idea about before you went in?
It was probably that thing of how the meth economy is working.
Right.
Because there'd been this suspicion that there's been this second meth boom. And I kind of wonder whether this second one is more damaging because it's going into poorer communities.
Yeah.
I mean, first time around in Auckland, it was, you had, dirty little secret, there were a lot of media people.
Well, it was for a while. It was a kind of post ecstasy cool party drug.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It was seen as cool and quite sophisticated. And it's different this time round, and it's people who don't have the social support and don't have a good way out. And I think that's you're right,
and it's tied in with such a wide that you're right with the small town thing, like the lack of businesses, in fact, the lack of employment, the lack of opportunities. The like you take the drug of the day, to get through your day if you've got not a lot else going on.
Yeah,
I don't mean
exactly.
all of small town New Zealand, everyone. That's obviously completely ridiculous. But those people who don't have a lot of direction.
But I mean, but even with meth, that rule of most people who take recreational drugs suffer no great harm.
No, that's right.
Most people who took meth probably stopped, possibly stopped because their friends started acting weird or something, but they didn't come to any great harm or any harm themselves. And this is one of the things that you actually need to...
Or then there's the other one, Russell. I've got to say, it's analogous to your woman in the 40s or whatever in the podcast. I probably got the era wrong. I mean, not even her age. I mean, the decade, who was taking the pet pills to go to the dance. There's plenty of casual amphetamine users, and that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a strong amphetamine, who don't fall into that addictive trap, who will take it every now and again.
Yeah.
I think that probably, if you look at the sheer amount of the stuff being sold, it can't be just the addicts. It must add up to a lot of casual users in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do need to paint the house.
I do think meth was different, and if you watched people on it, it becomes the focus much more. Whereas doing a line and going out to a gig or something, the line that you've had is not the focus of your evening, and you're not constantly going back and having another one. Yeah. Which I think is the difference there. And
but then you could
there
say
are a lot of older people.
But hang on a second, you could say that you just described addiction, not necessarily crystal meth.
True.
Because you could say that about sex, alcohol, gambling, But I do agree that on a chemical level, the science supports the fact that drug will ultimately create more addicts than other. But you see what I'm meaning? There's kind of two sides to that, I think.
Yeah, and actually...
I'm not trying to advocate meth here. I'm just, again, trying to have a reasoned discussion about these things.
Interesting point about on a chemical level, because a lot of people bought into what Johann Hari said in Chasing the Scream, this book that came out about a year and a half ago, where he had this whole new theory of addiction, that it wasn't chemically based and it was all about trauma and being disconnected and lonely and... Yeah, all those things. Yeah, people find it much easier to recover from addiction and get back on with their lives if they have jobs and homes and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, food, love, shelter, whatever it is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But that doesn't mean there's no such thing as a chemical basis for addiction, because there clearly is.
Well, no, totally. But that's nature versus nurture, which is a sort of an argument that's gone through so many strains of things. I remember family members having that argument about homosexuality or whatever. And so, for the record, with addiction, I have some insight into it through family and so on. I think it's any combination of both, and I think that one might exacerbate it more than the other. But I think there's certainly an argument for genetics or physiological reasons. But I think environment as well can play a part. I think. What do you think? Do you think there's an argument for both sides?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's clearly both. And as part of the podcast series, I went out to Higher Ground addiction treatment facility, and one of the things they do is actually ground people again, and in some cases teach them to cook. Yeah. And teach them to make their own bed and that kind of thing. And it gives them some sort of solidity. Yeah. And there's any amount of evidence for that, but again on Facebook, people would quote this quote from Johann Hari and say, "Oh, right, this is all addiction is." Well, no, it's not. It's both. Well, there is a chemical basis for addiction too. Yeah,
no, there is. That's right. So nature versus nurture. I'm generally, I'm a believer in both, where most of those arguments come on up. Yeah. And I think that higher ground model works also for. Don't forget that model is not just about. Getting off the substance or whatever. There's a lot of people who go through those treatment centres who are actually, those skills you talk about, they're learning about those after years of being in the penal system and years of broken homes.
Yeah.
So, learning to cook and make your bed is often not about, having discovered meth. It's about not having discovered all these basic building blocks we do as children, for those of us lucky enough to.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, you talk about their model, because it's basically 12 steps. And there's a growing group of people now who actually don't like the 12 steps model because it does kind of make the individual powerless, and it's this old thing that you have to believe in a higher power and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I interviewed a woman called Maya Salovitz, who's a former heroin addict. She's actually autistic as well, which is kind of cool. And her research indicates that most people who are addicted to opioids actually sort themselves out.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily never take another drug in their lives either. Because that's also part of that 12 steps thing, is that you swear off
complete
everything.
abstinence,
And that seems like quite a hard call as
complete
well.
abstinence.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, a lot,
I've never been one to complete abstinence. I'm a moderation guy.
You scratch under the surface, and a lot of people are in that program or similar, Now I've listened to a lot of podcasts, which funnily enough form the inspiration for this, long-form conversations, like Maron being the poster boy, Mark Maron. There's a lot of entertainment. There's a lot of people on those podcasts who are in recovery once you get to a certain age. But with what you're saying about that 12-step program, look, I think I see both sides of the argument. I see the people who say, okay, it's kind of a freaky semi-religious cult based on blah, 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 blah. But then I see the people it really works for, and I think to myself, well, how dare you turn around to say to those people, this is a quacky cult, when that guy's like, I'm 20 years clean, and my life's fucking amazing compared to how it was then. So I think the people it works for, and kind of leave them to it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. But you can see how it looks a bit like sort of secret handshake, dip your hat, walk in the door backwards from the outside.
In those kinds of circles, there is a kind of growing group of people who say, look, at the very least, are saying this is not all there is in addiction
that's right.
recovery.
No, that's right, And a lot of those, and as I say, disclaimer again, for those people it's worked for, it's based on sort of what would you say, not quasi, semi, it's a religion-based model, very much devised, I think it was AA a 40s or a 50s thing. It was quite early, and all those other ones have come from that. Goodness. Philosophizing about addiction and recovery. We've got just under 10 minutes to go. Where do we go from here, Russell? What do you want to talk about? Anything you want to bring up? What's coming next? What's coming up next? What's in the pipeline?
There is interest in a book based on From Zero, which I suspect will actually be quite different, but that will be a matter of actually getting some research funding, because you can't actually make money back from selling a book.
Which cuts back to what we were talking about an hour ago.
Exactly. What else is there?
I've just been looking into academic publishing, Russell, and reading about perhaps the rort that is, and thinking about giving hundreds of hours of my time to turning my thesis into a... Yeah.
That enrages me. There's someone outside the institutions.
Three markers, because you have 3 markers for a PhD. Was it all 3? Doesn't matter. At least 2 out of 3, it was a while ago, said this candidate should turn this into a book, which is really quite amazing. It's great feedback. And then I'm like, I said to someone at work, do you get sort of funding for a book or whatever? They're like, no, you just write it for the canons of knowledge. For this huge publisher who,
Which is which is okay if you're on a salary, then But I mean, for someone like me, I'm a freelancer. I'm not very good at working in offices.
Well, that's what as I was saying to you when we walked over the road before, I've just had 7 weeks off with no income where, yes, okay, I should have been working on publishing, but I'm kind of like, I think I might try and squeeze it into the... So there's talk of a book. Was that a publisher that approached you, or was that someone who said you should turn this into a book?
No, it was a publisher approached me, which was nice, and a good publisher as well. So I won't say anything until
populist book, a book marketed at everyone in New Zealand.
I think it does have to be a little more. What I'm leaning towards is the untold stories.
Yeah,
and there are tons of them because no one ever talked about
of drug use in New Zealand.
Drug use in New Zealand. Yeah, there are some good ones. Probably looking at personal stories that open up into more general, ideas about topics.
Right, so I get it. So personal stories that may or may not be salacious at points, but that open up a more general discussion about, hey, what are we doing with drugs in New Zealand?
I mean, for example, I had a neighbour up until 5 years ago who was a home baker.
Right.
I
didn't even know people still did homemade heroin.
Yeah. No, and he got busted once and was actually quite offended that the police thought he was making meth. I was like, I'm a good, honest home baker.
Yeah.
So
This is a 1970s recipe.
I'm doing a talk program at Splore.
Yeah.
I'd like to write this year on the blog more stuff about Auckland. I think the way Auckland's changing is really interesting.
Yeah. I'd love to talk more about that. We're going to run out of time. Yeah.
Despite all the naysayers, I think good things are happening in Auckland.
I'd agree. I've been here 10 years. I struggled when I first got back to New Zealand, to be honest. This isn't my home city, but I think Auckland's doing great stuff. The cycleways for a start.
Yeah. No, and I ride a bike, and I'm waiting to get my e-bike. It's going to turn up at some point. But I mean, that's been actually quite life-changing for me, because I hate going to the gym. Never liked the gym.
I'm with you. Walking or biking or doing something that, swimming occasionally, but similar problem to the gym in that I end up my mind, I don't know, maybe I would have been diagnosed with something that I wasn't when I was a kid, but any of those activities in one space, I start to...
Yeah,
I should be doing something else.
yeah. I mean, I've said it before. I think I'm slightly ADHD.
Yeah.
I relax by doing active things, basically.
I've got two more things to go because I've got to come back a topic. Something I forgot to ask is: do you think there's quite an irony in the fact that America, of all places, is softening up their drug policy in certain states when it was them that spread this narrative throughout the Western world?
Massive irony.
Yeah.
They've been the policemen of the UN drug conventions for 50 years.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's good because it means they can't really take the line they've taken up till now.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens under Trump. Because
he's not going to reverse. This cuts back to what we're talking about. He can't go back and reverse everything instantly. Middle manager.
It's a matter of whether his new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who's an appalling racist creep, whether Jeff Sessions wants to make an issue of it with the states. But I think that would actually... There are quite a number of people who voted for Trump who, are pot smokers.
Well, how about this, Russell? He's a capitalist. What would he have against pot?
Well, exactly.
I didn't finish that statement. He's a capitalist. What would he have against a product that seems to be doing leaps and bounds and doing great things for the economy?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think Trump has strong feelings one way or another.
I can't see him. I've never really thought about that. I can't. Just for the circles he's been in over the years and stuff, I can't really see him having a huge anti-drug kind of stance.
But Jeff Sessions is new Attorney General.
Right. Okay.
Certainly does. But I don't think they'll go there because you've now got like a third of Americans once the California and the other states that went for legal recreational in November. Yeah. Once they kick in, that will be a third of Americans live in states where there is legal recreational pot.
Yeah.
And you have to say, there has not been that many problems with it.
No. Really, it makes me wish we'd agreed with me.
It's gone quite well. It's actually gone incredibly well.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, the big problem in Colorado has been with edibles.
Why? Because they're so strong.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell. And it's like, why do there have to be so many edible products? There don't have to be gummy bears and cookies, and because that just raises the chance of that getting into the hands of children and into the mouths of children.
Yeah,
and that just seems kind of dumb.
Well, that's where I guess you've got this. I don't know enough about how each state's running it, but you've got this interesting mix of kind of supposed medical grounds and medical distribution versus plain old capitalism, where you want to keep updating your product to appeal to different audiences and so on. I've heard some hilarious podcasts of different guys, like the guys Joe Rogan has on, experimenting with like 3,000 milligram lollipops where most people take 30 and so on. So hey, before you go,
actually, one more thing about that. The big challenge I think for legal pot in the States is whether they can work it so that it doesn't turn into big tobacco and big liquor.
Yeah, but that's how it'll turn up. You got to. It's a
is there a way of avoiding that? And some people think cannabis clubs are a good way of avoiding that.
Yeah.
Like they operate in Europe, but the commerce such as it is at the moment is actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's relatively small companies who care about what they're doing, but how do you stop that becoming Weed Corp?
God, I'll get you going for another hour. Explain to me briefly how cannabis clubs would hinder large capitalist organisations getting involved
because they're not for profit.
Okay.
In Belgium and Spain and several other European countries, they're all slightly different regimes, but basically you can declare yourself a cannabis club, sign up members, and the club itself defines how much weed everyone who's a member gets a month, but they get a license to legally produce it.
I'm just chuckling to myself because that sounds like a nation like the USA has just discovered this product that is hugely profitable and marketable, and you're suggesting they go down some kind of socialist route with it.
Yeah. Kind of.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm saying you go, come on.
My friend...
GlaxoSmithKline, who's going to... Yeah.
My friend Sanho Tree, who's a drug policy researcher, lives in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And they got half legalisation, again on one of these citizens' initiatives. But the D.C. its financial affairs are controlled by Congress, and the Republican Congress blocked them actually setting up a commercial system. So now they've got this kind of hippie gift economy where you can give it away, you can grow it, but you can't sell it. And it's kind of... It actually seems to work okay.
Well, maybe there will be that change. Do you think weed will at least be decriminalised in New Zealand in our lifetimes?
Yeah, in our lifetime, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's on the cards shortly.
Maybe in 5 years, certainly in 10 years.
Wow, okay. Hey, before you go, you haven't heard the podcast before, we call that black bag there the awkward satchel of segues.
Right.
And it's not because anything's been awkward or ever has been on the show. I've had great guests, but chuck your hand in there and pull out a bit of paper, and that last question can be your last question. Thanks for coming in, by the way.
No worries. It's fun.
The awkward satchel of segues.
What makes you laugh every time? Oh, God. Samantha Bee at the moment, actually.
What's that?
Samantha Bee, she used to be on The Daily Show. She now has a show. It's actually oddly enough, on TVNZ's Man channel, Duke. But she's funny. What makes me laugh every time?
Well, that makes you laugh
My
every
cat
time.
makes me laugh.
I don't find cats that comical. What?
And actually, there's a really nice answer to that. My partner, Fiona Ray, we've been together a very long time, decades. We've actually known each other for even longer, and we still amuse each other.
That's good.
That's the best laughing I ever have, is when we sit down and take the piss or whatever's on TV or something. So yeah, that's the answer is Fiona.
People who suss that being friends is definite cornerstone
absolutely.
to a relationship. Thanks, Russell.
Cheers.